a former member of the early feminist counseling collective in Washington, D.C. in the early 1970s. These are my credentials for doing this, partly. And I'm the author of Women in Charge, Dilemmas of Women in Authority, 1985. And I'm an occasional contributor to Lilith, a Jewish feminist magazine. In 2020, I wrote a kind of an essay review for them about the off-Broadway play Gloria a Life, which reminded me of how much it was so much worse back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s than we care to remember. And Gloria Steinem is portrayed there as a hopeaholic. That's what she calls herself. She still has hope, despite the fact that there have been fewer changes than we might hope for. Now, we don't have Gloria with us today, but we do have two of her partners in revolution. Letty Pogrebin and Joanne Edgar are two of the founders, and they're here to answer the questions posed by the title that you all got in your emails, the one that helped get you here. What's changed? What's left? Letty, according to her Wikipedia profile, is an American author, journalist, lecturer, and social activist. She is a founding editor of Ms. Magazine, the author of 12 books, I hope that's right, and was an editorial consultant for the TV special Free to Be You and Me, as well as for the album and book associated with it, for which she earned an Emmy. Joanne, according to a Women's Media Center profile, was one of the founders of Ms. Magazine, where she was an editor for 17 years, and she is currently a writer and a consultant for nonprofit organizations and foundations. I was sitting next to her, so she told me that she worked for 10 years as communications director for the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. I just wanted to mention that a recently published book is titled 50 Years of Ms., the best of the pathfinding magazine that ignited a revolution. One of the headlines on the Ms. website yesterday, last night, maybe still today, was why are women still excluded from peace talks across the globe? And that's just the kind of question that Ms. is great at. So we'll discuss, I think, the magazine's impact on journalism, on feminism, and on America and the world. And Silurian member Roberta Gratz, who is at our table too, has written several books and many articles about urban issues, and she also has written for Ms. the seminal article about Roe versus Wade for the magazine. So she will be moderating, and let's get started on this.
I have to say, Roberta, that piece you wrote for us was not seminal, it was ovular.
I know, I realize that's seminal is the wrong word.
I was writing a piece about abortion for Ms., and it was going to press in January 1973. Before it went to press, the decision came down and, of course, wound up rewriting it. But it was totally coincidental that it was that month. So in 1963, I went to work for the New York Post as a copy boy. The long newspaper strike was still going on, but Dolly Schiff broke with the Publishers Association and went back into print ahead of everyone else. The Post needed employees at the lowest rung, and there I came. In the newsroom, I answered to boy, as reporters and editors needed someone to carry copy from one point to the other. Frankly, I never thought about it or even felt awkward answering to boy until the first black copy boy came along and they all switched to copy instead of boy. These were pre-women's movement days, and in fact, the Post had an impressive group of star women reporters. Helen Dudar, Fern Meyer Ekman, Barbara Yunker, Hope McLeod, Sally Hammond, Nora Ephron, a fair number for that period. My consciousness was as it always had been. Often I would comment to people, "It's not easy being a working mother," but that was as far as it went. In fact, I freelanced 2 magazine articles at the time, in the late 60s. For Vogue, I wrote, "How to help your help to help." And for Mademoiselle, I wrote, "Who needs the women's movement? Some of us are doing it all." I was so smug. Then came the first issue of Ms. Magazine and Jane O'Reilly's Click article. For those of you who never read it, and you all should, you cannot imagine how revolutionary it was. As she wrote, one example, in Houston, Texas, a friend of mine stood and watched her husband step over a pile of toys on the stairs, put there to be carried up. "Why can't you get this stuff put away?" he mumbled. "Click." "You have 2 hands," she said, turning away. The article was full of mind-blowing clicks. It woke me up in a big way. Why was I cooking dinner and washing the dishes while my husband went off to do something else? Click. Why was I the only one to change the diapers? Click. You get the point. O'Reilly's Click article changed my life and my marriage. Fortunately for my husband got the picture quickly and an equilibrium was struck. I tell this story because many people today have either forgotten or never knew what a life changer Ms. Magazine was. Every article was like a wake-up call. Even more than that, it covered issues no other magazine would touch. Battered wives, sexual harassment, date rape, teen abortions, and on and on. The first issue was supposed to stay on the newsstands for 8 weeks and sold its 300,000 press run in 8 days. So my first question is, how did you even get together to decide to do this?
In the first place, you mean? You mean in our little meeting rooms and living rooms and kitchens, sitting around and saying, you know, it's like people saying, let's put on a play. And it's like, you know, let's start a magazine. And then it started to be real. And we had very regular meetings in different living rooms, kitchens, and, you know, and coffee houses. And what we did was sort through women's lives and come up with a table of contents that made sense, that touched every issue, because we figured this might be the one and only, and it ought to stand in history as a representative of what women's lives are like and what women care about. So we had a piece on housewives, and obviously we had Jane's piece, which cut across all of the class differences, race differences, everything. I mean, every woman knows what it's like to have to pick up the socks her husband left on the floor the night before. And we had a piece on welfare, and we had a piece on new marriage contract. Joanne, who is the institutional memory of all of us founders, she she's doing the show and tell. But we did organize ourselves. We ended up with a tiny 3-room suite. Was it 3 rooms?
Yeah.
We were
Barely
squashed-
3 rooms, 3
squashed
closets put together.
370 Lex. And then along came Clay Felker. I'll just do the basic chronology here. Or he didn't come along. Gloria was a writer for New York Magazine and did have a sort of seismic effect on him. And she said, why don't you take a couple of excerpts from the magazine and help us launch? Which they did. The final issue of December in 1971 had a picture of the actual issue of Ms. Did you just hold up the red one? Yeah, that one. That was the preview issue, and Clay Felker agreed to put it not only on the cover and say, this is your chance to preview this radical, amazing, revolutionary new magazine, and of course, anything that had Gloria's names attached got attention. And inside, I don't know how many pieces did we have in that issue, something like
Didn't count them.
5, 4. We had a good representation of the pieces that would end up in our first issue, which was published in January 72, and that's this one, and we called it the preview issue. And we called it that, hoping there would be a bunch of other issues, and we would have a life as a monthly. And lo and behold, as Roberta just said, we sold out in 8 days. Not just did we sell out in urban areas or on college campuses, but in tiny little towns in Texas and, the panhandle and places you wouldn't expect. And so we started publishing for good, and it's lasted in July of 1972.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is that when we were having our little meetings and dreaming about starting a magazine, we didn't have any money. I mean, it does take money to publish a magazine. We wanted a mainstream color magazine that was accessible in supermarkets and that everyone could afford.
Glossy.
Glossy, thank you. And so that's why the connection with New York Magazine really launched us truly in a way that we were able to raise some money. But even after that, we got something like 200,000 people who sent in a little card saying they would subscribe. And our original card said $6 a year, which we wanted because we wanted it to be accessible to anyone of any income. And it was one of our advisors said that even, this was 1971, 72, said even then that $6 wouldn't pay for the paper. So we had to change it. But we were at the point of going to press. So the only way we could change it at that point, which was way before computers, was to cut out the 6 and turn it upside down and make it a 9. So we charged $9 a year for the first subscriptions.
And then, having Gloria as part of our little founding circle, you can't overestimate, no matter how you think about it, the impact of Gloria. I mean, people would make a day to see our advertising women and say, only I'll see you, we'll see you, and you can do the sales pitch, but bring Gloria. Yeah. I mean, that was basically people's way to meet Gloria. And I shamelessly took advantage of that, as you remember. My husband used to play tennis with a guy named Kenny Rosen, who had a horrible accident in Central Park, hit his head on a tree trunk and was ruined. But before that happened, he was part of, what was the name of that Sarnoff's group?
Warner Communications.
Yeah, Warner Communications. And my husband played tennis with him in Fire Island. And I said, he knew that I was part of this founding circle. And he said, gee, I'd love to meet Gloria. And I said, only if you bring Bill Sarnoff. And he brought Bill Sarnoff. We met at one of those 4-star restaurants that Kenny and Sarnoff used to eat at. And we ended up with a check for $1 million. Which was real money then.
Yeah, and the key to that $1 million was that they had to take a minority interest, because the whole point of Ms. is that it would be woman-owned and woman-controlled, and so that complicated the fact of. Is it not on? Is it
Closer to your
I like
mouth.
that.
closer? Oh, that complicated our search for funding because we got some interest initially, but they all wanted a majority interest, and we were looking for something other than that because we wanted to keep control of the magazine ourselves.
So I know there was a backlash, which I want to ask you about, but I want to tell you one little excerpt from the book. They got a letter after the first issue from a husband who said the magazine was trash and he was canceling his wife's subscription. And then they got a letter from the wife re-establishing her subscription. So the backlash was enormous. It was cataclysmic. Give us some tidbits about what that was like.
The most famous one was Harry Reasoner's, right?
Well, Harry Reasoner went on television when our first issue came up and said, you know, this is okay. They have enough to say. They've covered marriage, they've covered jobs, they've covered a few things that he listed. And they said, but I'll give it no more than 5 issues because there's nothing else.
Issues, not 5 years.
Issues, yes. But 5 years later, when we celebrated our 5th anniversary, he went on television again and he said I was wrong. And we kept publishing.
No other good stories like that?
Well, our letters were amazing.
Right.
You mentioned the letter that talked about that particular incident, but the letters were mostly from women who saw their lives in the magazine. And they felt that it was their magazine. This is not a backlash story, but it not only rang true to us, but it gave us ideas. There were staff members, younger staff members who came in as interns. Their full-time job was to read the letters and to answer the letters because we got so many letters.
We used to do it. We editors used to just reach in. We got bags, loads. You can just imagine because this uncorked an access route, well, to mix metaphors in a journalist group is a big mistake. Anyway, you get the idea. It did allow women to feel heard and seen. They weren't just asking for 43 ways to make hamburger, or how to turn potholders into lampshades, or how to, satisfy your husband in bed after you've put 4 kids in the tub and in bed. And here we were saying, tell the truth about your life, and your life means something. And even if you are, quote, a volunteer, you are, if you're doing what you love, an activist, So the letters that we would pull out of the editors every now and we were encouraged to, and we encouraged each other to read them. And I would encourage you, if you have never seen the book by Mary Tom called Letters to Ms., it's just a great read. But what stunned me was the number. I wonder if you would guess and call out what you think were about 1/4 or maybe 20% of the letters, what they were about. Incest.
Incest. Wow.
That was what shocked me. I mean, we had made it okay to tell the truth about your life, and the truth that bubbled up was my uncle, my stepfather, my brother, my grandfather, stories that chilled your blood.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Different question. Was it difficult or easy to get writers to contribute? Because at the time, some of them may have felt they'd be typecast. If you write for Ms., you have kind of an A on your chest. Was that difficult?
An M.
Have an M. I don't think it was difficult. I don't recall it being difficult. Maybe the people who didn't want to be associated with us never associated with us. So, but we got so many people who submitted unsolicited manuscripts, and they would get very upset if it was rejected because they said, "I'm a woman. This is my magazine. How can you possibly reject my article?" And so our problem was actually the opposite, except that we didn't pay very much money, and we did not always pay on time.
Which is why the writers' union, you know, what do they call it? Low-hanging fruit. We were like hanging like right down here, the plucking, because we were going to make good on our principles, and so
And
they tried to
we wanted
organize
to,
us.
yeah.
Yeah. But I was going to say that it was such a different time then. You all know that, those of you who look vaguely like our age, that, you know, there were 7 newspapers and 5 television, or 7 television stations. So everybody was kind of on the same page when there was a great cultural happening. So Ms. made news. Anything we did made news. You know, I mean, I have a picture of myself marching on the New York Times. That made news because I was marching on the New York Times for equal employment listings.
And to use the term Ms.
Way before to use
Yeah.
the term Ms.
Yeah.
We were just asking for the basics. Can you imagine the fact that you would get out of college with an engineering degree and you would have to look under help wanted women? Because there was no way you could just break through and say, well, I qualify for this job. Yeah, but we're not looking, we're looking for men. It was right out there. So there was that, to sex integrate the employment ads, the help wanted ads, and also suddenly Ms. I mean, the world was using Ms. and the Times wasn't. Pardon me, Arthur. Not your fault. Not your fault. But we did march on and lie down on the street and make news. So writers wanted to be part of it, I think, you know, because we were, I often say we were sort of that era's ideological hula hoop, you know. We were an event. Oh, and I should say that we were such an event that we did our 1-year anniversary party on a boat in the Hudson. And John and Yoko came. So, I mean, and we have pictures of them wearing Happy Birthday Ms. #1.
Right.
And you didn't bring one of those.
No, I did. I don't have one of those. We donated it to the New York Historical Society Women's Wing.
Yeah.
So they have it.
Yeah. Great.
I remember when the Times finally used Ms., and we at the Post, of course, wanted the same thing. Now, we had a woman publisher who was never married to a Schiff. She was a Schiff, but she insisted on calling herself Mrs. Dolly Schiff. So we kind of wanted the same privilege for the women we were writing about to have the opportunity to use Ms., Mrs., or Miss. And invariably, eventually, it all
Well,
turned.
Joanne should tell how it happened because you were closer to it with Gloria's involvement.
I don't know specifically how it happened. I know that people picketed the New York Times. And one of my favorite memories is our copy editor picketing the New York Times over the use of the term Ms. And they used to write an article about Gloria, for example, and they would say, Miss Steinem of Ms. Magazine.
I had the same, Mrs. Pogrebin of Ms.
Right, Mrs. Pogrebin of Ms. Magazine. And so it eventually made no sense, and everyone was using it.
I think it came as a result of Gloria having lunch with Abe.
Oh, it may very well have.
And then she sent him, when he did it, she sent him a bunch of
Flowers.
roses.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
So, given all that you've said so far, and on top of what we all know, was Ms. a magazine or a movement?
That is so easy to answer. It was a movement. And it was so much more than a magazine. I mean, we picked our issues and our articles based on what was happening in women's lives and around the country and also around the world. We also did a whole bunch of special events. We had a Ms. Metric Mile race at Madison Square Garden before women could run the metric mile in the Olympics. We had a concert at the New York Philharmonic, which was of all women composers and conducted by a woman, and that had never happened. So we lobbied for the ERA until we became a nonprofit and we couldn't directly lobby anymore. But I mean, we were just so much more. We participated in the National Women's Conference in 1977 in Houston, and it was a movement.
And we were treated like movement central, you know?
Yeah.
We were election central, however you want to put it. When we expanded, we built an editorial meeting room that had, what do you call things that are in
Risers.
risers or stadium type seating.
Yeah.
You know, not huge, but in a room with a high ceiling, you could have 1 or 2 layers. And we would invite guests, and guests would invite themselves. And so one day we would be sat in or visited by an organized homemakers group, you know, coming to say, why aren't there more articles in your magazine about, thank you, David, about housewife rights. Well, we had to show them, because the last issue had it, and we have it planned for the next issue. We had to answer to people. They would come as constituencies. I know the Times invites people as guests at editorial editorial meetings or board meetings or whatever. People came and just brought their troubles and brought their demands, and we invited them in and we listened to them. And their they brought us things that resulted in terrific pieces, I think.
Also, a lot of people knocked on the door and came in and became staff members.
That's right. With no experience whatsoever.
Well, some had experience, but but they all had stories.
All had stories.
Yeah.
Well, Harriet Lyons
Yeah.
came in with a great idea of recognizing Marilyn Monroe's the anniversary of her death with a feminist take on Marilyn Monroe, which was a great essay. That's what we did. I mean, we covered the news, but the news also came to us because we were interested in what everybody was doing in the line of the sort of feminist agenda. So you didn't have to scrounge around for stuff. In fact, people say, what do you miss? When I left Ms. in 1989, and I still feel it was my home. I became a freelance writer, and what did I miss most? Those Tuesday editorial meetings. It was like I died and went to heaven. Everything I cared about was being discussed by smart people, and we were planning articles that were going to help women change their lives. It was euphoric.
So I'd like to bring it to the present, and then we'll open up for questions. There have been a lot of movements since then, and my own feeling is that women have been passed by a number of movements. We still don't have an ERA. And I wonder where you think Ms. fits in today's spectrum.
Do you want to go first?
That's mine. That's yours, honey.
I think there is still an absolute crucial need for Ms., but I think it's a different need now because times have changed. As Roberta said, we've gone through big, huge hopes, some victories, a lot of backlash. I mean, look at what's happened with abortion. And once the abortion backlash started, Roberta wrote another article in Ms., and we used the same photograph of the woman who had died from a botched abortion. So we've gone through all of those things, but the other movements that have started need women, and we need the other movements. And that became so visible to me in the march in January 2017, after Trump was elected. The person who has the red hair was elected, and we all went to orange. Yes, right. It's not red. Orange. We all went to Washington D.C. and there were so many climate activists there. There were Black Lives Matter activists there. There were women activists. There were the whole range of issues that we all need together to really make it work. And I think that the current Ms., which is more sort of narrowly political than we were, I'm not sure they would agree with that, but that's sort of my assessment. I think that they are a critical part of that, and that's really important.
You should just know chronologically that in 1987, we sold to an Australian company. They sold to two women entrepreneurs, also Australian, and then their company was bought by somebody else. The reason that's germane to this whole story is that we had tried being nonprofit, and you gain on the reduced postal rights, you can raise money from foundations, all of which we did. Gloria and Pat Carbine, our publisher, did their dog and pony show all over the place to raise money. But we were hobbled because we couldn't do the lobbying. We couldn't take a strong stand. We had to couch everything in sort of bipartisan or neutral terms. So when the magazine sold in 1989 to those three people, I don't know how many years that took, Joanne, do you know? Until the Feminist Majority Foundation took over.
2001, the Feminist Majority took over.
Okay, and that was Ellie Smeal's group. She was one of the presidents and I think co-founder of NOW, and they've done it ever since. But it has gradually evolved to the point where it's mostly for feminist studies, women's studies in colleges, and it covers a lot of international news that nobody else is covering. So they're not as good a read as we were, I really have to say. It's a slog sometime, I will say that. But maybe because I'm so old that reading and rereading, the ideology that became so epiphanic to me in the early 70s. I know this. I don't need to read this over and over and over again. But I know that each new generation has to. There has to be a moment of ideological click, practical click, all the different clicks.
And they also have the online presence. We, of course, had no online when we started. We had rotary phones and electric typewriters. But they have all the demands of having current information online, and they do a really good job of covering that in a way that we certainly couldn't do when we were a monthly publication.
And we did, and they now do, scholarship subscriptions for people who can't afford it and for women in prison.
Yeah.
So I think, when you say, is it a magazine or a movement, it's so interwoven. It's, it's a permeable membrane.
It really is.
I'd like to open up for questions.
We were secretaries when we started in secretaries, we could be researchers. That's as far as we could go. Harry Reasoner came over to ABC News, where I was the secretary, and he decreed that women had to wear dresses. My daughter, who's in her 30s, when she graduated from college, she didn't have to start as a secretary. She's whizzed ahead. She's a documentarian on, she's a producer on documentaries, but she has other problems. So what do you see as the problems today for women?
Well, we would need to talk to your daughter and the daughters of many people in this room and the nieces of many people in this room. I think it's changed a lot, and their opportunities are much larger, and there are fewer restrictions. But it's still not easy. I mean, the pay rates are still not equal. When we started the magazine, we had a button that said 59 cents, and that's because women made 59 cents on the dollar. I think now it's 82 cents or something like that. But so it hasn't fully become equal, and certainly responsibilities in the home are not yet fully equal. I know some families where they are equally caregivers for children, but I know most of the families I know, there's not that same equality.
And somebody said something about there being a piece about no women in the room, in the negotiating rooms, in the peace talks of any of the countries that are in the midst of conflict. That's a universal problem, and that's something that women all over the world are addressing. I mean, the movement is everywhere. I think of it as, does a fish know it's in water? You're in the middle of the women's movement. If you have a daughter who got discriminated against in playing the sport she wanted, or she's part of a team that has to, do their practice sessions in a smaller gym without any lights or any of the number of horror stories that we heard from athletes always. Why is my team underfunded? Why don't we have, clean underwear, clean uniforms? Why can't we get new sneakers? All of these sort of rudimentary issues that you never hear from the boys' teams. That kind of thing. It's from the grandest issue, peace talks, to why don't we have clean uniforms? It's that.
Thank you, Billie Jean King.
Yes, yes. So first of all, thank you. Secondly, I have an arc of the moral universe question for you. So we were all young ones when you did the important work that you did and continue to do. We've seen the people putting monsters in jail, the Time's Up thing.
Me too.
Me too, that's what I was looking for, yeah. And of course, now we're all engaged in the reproductive rights movement, which is huge. But arc of the universe, where do you see us generationally? Will it take a generation, 2, 3, before there is real gender parity?
Depends on how well we get out the vote in November 2024. You can't answer that question without knowing, under whose aegis we will be living. Really.
And we were young, or at least I was young. You were young when we started the magazine. We were all young. I mean, I felt like I learned the magazine changed my life. The articles that we ran changed my life too.
I'm 84. She just turned
I just turned 80
last week.
So
83.
50 years ago, you can do the math.
Right.
Well, that's part of what I was saying before. I don't think people don't realize that there is still a long way to go, and it's not just about reproductive rights. You can go, I'm sure all of you come from different areas of the business or other businesses. There's still a lot of inequality, and I think it will take a while before it's up to our daughters, actually, and they have a different...
And granddaughters.
And granddaughters, yes, I have to remember that. And they have a different sensibility. It's very interesting to me, and I've had this conversation, I'm sure you have with yours. My daughters have no idea what it was like to be a working mother at our time, and our granddaughters just kind of take it for granted because it's all sort of has been. So I'm not sure that they have the same urge to change, the spectrum at this point. We'll have to see.
Well, I used to be a little critical of the third wave. The discussion has been simplified to waves. First wave was suffrage, and second wave was us, when we were mostly litigation, legislation, and consciousness raising. And then third wave was kind of lipstick feminism. In other words, why shouldn't we be free to show our belly buttons? And why shouldn't we be able to feel just great, picking lipsticks? And I get it. I mean, because they were trying to sort of play it out throughout the culture. Look at it that way and you get it, And just like Ellen was such a seismic figure in terms of LGBTQ when she just was who she was, these young women said, I just want to be who I am. I don't want to hide my body because I might be raped, I want to be able to wear the clothes I want. Where was I? I was making a point.
That's the best question, Letty.
Oh, God. Where was
Question?
What did you say?
Well, the point is it's clearly generational, and
okay,
each
right.
generation
Thank you
will have their own
It
iteration.
only takes a minute to get me back on track. You just need a minute. No, I feel that the movement continues, as I said, like a fish doesn't know it's in water, in so many forms. Whether it's union women who, are object now to having nighttime meetings because they're putting the kids to bed, because their households are full of men who won't pick up a finger still. So they're active, they're big shots in the union, but they can't come at, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So meetings have had to be rearranged. So it's everywhere. It just doesn't have a banner that says, you know, we are the women's movement.
Question here.
Actually, I just want to set the record straight on 2 points. First of all, you may not have paid on time, but you did eventually pay.
That's Grace Lichtenstein who wrote for us.
And second, at the times when you asked to use Ms., and at first Abe thought it was nonsense, there were women in the newsroom who did bother him enough so that at least he heard you.
So it wasn't just Gloria and lunch.
Right.
When I graduated from college in 1969, I took the Radcliffe Publishing course, and Patricia Carbine, your publisher, was one of my teachers at Harvard. And we had 60 people in the class, and we were told, all of you men will start as assistant editors, and all of you girls will start as secretaries. And nobody thought to raise her hand and say, why, sir, is that the case? But my question is, when the feminist movement at that time came to fruition, a lot of black women said, this is not for me. I would love to be taken care of. I've been working in an office or in a school or wherever all my life. And my mother or my grandmother may have worked in someone's kitchen. That didn't happen in our family, but it did happen in many. And so I'm wondering how you were able to reach non-white, non-middle class women. You said you made the effort, but did you? Do you feel you did?
I do think we reached those women. I mean, how we organized the effort, I do not necessarily recall because we didn't have marketing for things like that. But this is one of our early covers, and it's Shirley Chisholm and Sissy Farenthold, who were running for president and vice president in 1972. We had a lot of black editors. We had black writers. The first issue included a lot of black writers. We made an effort to include diversity, which was not a term that we really used in those days, in our staff and in the table of contents. And I think that a lot of the divisions around whether we represented black women, LGBTQ women, and others was really part of an effort on some members of the press to say that this was just a white middle class movement or maybe white upper class movement, and so therefore you don't have to take it seriously. But it was the black women who were much stronger on feminism than we were. When you looked at Gallup polls, they were the ones who were supportive of the issues of reproductive justice. They were the ones who were supportive of the issues of getting paid for what they did. If you calculated how much pay they should get for what they did, even when they were housekeepers in someone's home, it would be a living wage that they weren't getting. So that's the most I can say. I do understand that for people who live in poverty, the need to have support and maybe just relax more when they get older is critical.
I also think it's important to realize there were a lot of women who didn't buy into the Ms. idea and wanted to be taken care of and married into wealth or whatever and weren't looking for the kind of attitude and position that the Ms. movement was basically offering. It wasn't everyone.
Talk about the backlash. I
Right,
mean,
and the
women were living with men who were angry about them reading Ms.
Yeah, I contributed a number of articles to Ms. over time.
What is your name?
I'm sorry?
Can't see.
Can't
and
see
what
you.
is your
What is
name?
your name?
Cheryl McCarthy. And I think one of the things that the magazine did was make women and men aware of issues that they didn't know were issues, or if they knew they were issues, they didn't quite understand the issue. I did a couple of pieces on, I was asked to do a couple of pieces on female genital mutilation. And I said, sure. And I knew it was bad, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And I remember rooting around in a bookstore trying to find an article with some pictures so I could figure out what exactly was done to women. And so I was able to learn, and I was able to tell other people. And I think that was one of the real accomplishments of Ms., to make people aware of these issues and explain it to them.
Right. That raises for me the time in the 70s, I guess, when we did a piece on the American way of birth. It was critical of the disempowerment. It was the way that medical people disempower women. As soon as if you're in labor, and you get infantilized, take this, honey, it'll help, don't take that. You're having natural childbirth, don't be ridiculous. We kind of deconstructed the American way of birth the way Jessica Mitford deconstructed the American way of death. And we lost, and we had pictures, and we lost Johnson & Johnson, who had a 12-month contract with us, pulled. This is a company that makes products for babies that didn't want to see birth. Birth was offensive. It was too graphic.
We lost advertisers in many cases because of the editorial that we wrote. And when the magazine became a nonprofit, when it started to refuse taking ads at all, when it became non-advertising, it was Gloria Steinem wrote an article called Sex, Lies, and Advertising, in which she connected the traditional women's magazine editorial copy that was directly connected to the advertising.
Still is.
It's things like how to wash your hair. And then next to it would be a shampoo ad. So we didn't do that kind of thing.
Gloria did. Why don't we see any articles in Esquire on how to shave?
Right.
Back here.
Hello. I agree it's important to reach the granddaughters, but please don't forget the grandsons, especially the teenage ones, the early teenage ones, because we grandmothers need some help with this.
No, you're absolutely
agree.
right, because it's the change that we're looking for will never happen until it's with everybody.
My first article for Ms. was called Down with Sexist Upbringing. And right here. And it's astonishing to me that women who are working through with their mates or partners sex roles that are problematic in the home and unfair, raising boys who just are being raised with the old stereotypes. How you're ever going to break that cycle is that, the notion that to let a boy play with a doll is going to emasculate him rather than maybe make him a better daddy. Why shouldn't he get to practice being a daddy same way as little girls practice being a mommy? Well, if you make dolls off limits, then suddenly it becomes only a girl thing, only a woman thing to take good care of a baby. Well, that's so basic, so basic. So you're absolutely right, and the thing that pleases me the most is when I read surveys about men who are thinking in terms of marrying women and how they're going to share, worrying about how they're going to share. They'll say, I'm going to medical school, I want to be able to share, Who ever heard that from a man? I want to figure out how to have balance in my life. Who ever heard that? Well, young men are talking that way more and more.
That's why you did Free to Be You and Me. I mean, one of the reasons why you did.
We did. And we had the movement and the magazine were accused always of being anti-man and anti-family. Feminism in general. We were anti-man, anti-family. We had hair on our legs. We wore combat boots. We didn't wear bras, and we didn't shave pluck our eyebrows. I mean, we were this package that sounded like a glob of awfulness. And I think, where was I on this one?
I did have combat boots.
You did? I didn't shave my legs,
I love
actually.
them.
Again, I've lost my train. This is a problem.
Well, it's directed at men.
Yes, but where was I going?
You were talking about
Oh, Frida, thank you. Thanks, Grace. Yes, we had, and I said how everybody, the big they out there, said we're anti-man, anti-family, and anti-child, and we were the only, quote, women's magazine that had a monthly feature for children called Stories for Free Children, which I was the editor of because I was the only one who had, at that point, small children. When we started Ms., my kids were, I have twin girls, and they were 6 and my son was 3. So I had all of these issues in my life, you know? And I think that the fact that we did Stories for Free Children and that we were very conscious about doing stories that affect families, that are in terms of literally who does the dishes, how do you divide up the chores. We had a marriage contract in the magazine that Alex Kate Shulman did. It didn't save her marriage, but it helped a lot of other people. And famously, why this reminds me of this one is because it was the most talked about in the first issue, and that is we have had abortions. I mean, in terms of family and reproductive rights, we covered it all. We had who's on our sign-up? We had the most extraordinary, prominent women who signed a two-page spread. We have had abortions, even if they hadn't had abortions. They said they did because we used to call something, you know, political positivism. In other words, if you were for something and it didn't affect you, you made yourself part of that constituency. So we would say we're all lesbians. You want to call the women's movement lesbian? Fine, we're all lesbians. It's like the yellow star on the Danish king.
Yeah. Also, we're HIV positive.
Right.
In Africa, there's a big movement around that.
Right.
But on the equality front, there's also a policy issue because child care has to be a piece of it. Parental leave for both men and women, mothers and fathers, has to be a piece of it, as well as a cultural change.
The people who signed this, who astonished me, well, you all must have known Joan Bingham, Patty Bosworth, Susan Brownmiller, Hortense Cowlisher, Judy Collins, Mary Cunningham, the advertising woman, Anselma Dell'Olio, wild, wonderful radical, did Not for Women Only on TV. She was a producer. Karen DeCrow, a founder of Now, right? Barbara Lee Diamondstein.
Gail Green.
Gail Green, Susan Edmondson, Nora Ephron. She'd never had an abortion. She said, I'm signing. Lee Grant, the actress. It just goes on. Lillian Hellman, Billie Jean King. Maria Manis, Mary Rogers, Eleanor Perry, Grace Paley, Susan Sontag, Barbara Tuchman, Anais Nin. Amazing group, willing to stand up when abortion was not yet legal.
No questions from men?
They know everything.
You don't have to be intimidated. We won't
Here you
bite.
go.
I was covering the women's movement for Newsday when they were babying Ms. Magazine. And I'm not as high as I was when I came in. It might be because I finished the wine long ago. But you know, there's a big difference now. Yes, we still have far to go. But you know what? They listen to us now. Thank you, Ohio.
Thank you, Ohio.
I lived in San Francisco after I graduated from college, and I was aware of, the women's movement. I was working in a socialist feminist film collective, and the women turned to me and they said, Spencer, we're all going to go, only sisters. And I was getting mail, dear sister Spencer, we're sorry we lost your films. In solidarity, Twin City Women's Film Collective. And, they just assumed, and my name is sort of ambivalent. Anyway, what my question to you is, because I was in San Francisco and I saw, the women who were like Margot St. James, who were active in women's rights, and she was pushing for prostitution rights. I was curious, how did Ms. deal with sexual freedom? Because clearly, when you founded the 60s, you know, my sister's generation were already on the past, and you know, women had a right to have pleasure, but then it became sexist. Or could it be manipulated by the playboys and the penthouses of the world? And I was just curious how you walked that erotic line.
I'll tell about me, and then you answer it generically, okay? I threatened to leave the magazine twice. Once was when a member of our editorial staff was going to write a piece about loving to be tortured and held down and, you know, tied down and attacked in the subway in a scenario that she and her lover had planned. I mean, they had all this stuff that they got off on. And it was argued by some, I don't remember where you stood on it, that nothing human should be alien to us, and we represent women's lives, and this is one choice. To be a masochist is a choice. And I said, I'm leaving if we publish this, because there are so many women out there who are being told, other women enjoy this, you know, they see it on their pornography. I don't understand what your problem is with this, you know? Why don't you just cooperate? Why don't we just do a scene, you know, where you happen to be the one who's tied up and flayed? And I just felt that it's the way I felt about Hillary when she stayed with Bill. It's like that marked a pattern that women do all the time. They stay with guys who humiliate them and who ruin their dignity. And I wanted her to leave Bill. I thought that it was worth leaving him for the sake of this country's women who are stuck in marriages where men walk all over them or cheat on them or treat them like shit, pardon you. And that's how I felt about that piece. And we didn't publish it. And I mean, I think the vote was definitely with me. The second example, then I want to hear what you had to say about your memory of that, because your memory's like a steel trap.
Not really.
Yes, really. The second time was when we were nonprofit, and Christy Hefner wanted to give us money. And I said, Christy Hefner, the daughter of Hugh Hefner from Playboy. And she was presenting herself, and still is. And I'm a member of the Brandeis University Women's and Gender Board, Committee Board, whatever. And she funds us, and it makes me cringe. She makes herself, as a successful businesswoman, to be a model when the money was made on the backs of women, or on women on their backs, put it that way. And I said, if we take that money, I'll feel besmirched. I can't stay. And everybody, I think, voted with me on that, even though we needed our money desperately at that time.
We needed as much as we could get. On the first point that you made about that article, it was one of the few times in the history of the time that I was there for 17 years that we actually voted on an article. People had this image of us because we listed ourselves alphabetically on the masthead, and we talked about ourselves as a group of editors. People had an image that we would sit in a circle on the floor and vote on every article. We didn't do that. As you're all journalists, so you know that if you did that, you'd never have a publication. You'd never make your deadlines. But that article did generate a conversation within the magazine that led to a major cover story on pornography versus erotica. And that was really interesting. And so it really had a good point. On Christy Hefner, it was sort of not in my worldview. I wasn't one of the fundraisers, so I didn't sort of pay that much attention to it. But I certainly understand. I also know that she's funded a lot of good things. So,
what's it going to take to get the women really motivated in 2024, especially Republican women?
Depends on which Republican women you're talking about.
Anyone who votes.
You know, it's hard. That's a hard question. I think I think what we're seeing is variations all over the place.
The choice is definitely
And it's
motivating women.
It is motivating women of all stripes, and it's going to be a very interesting, a very significant point in the election. And I think anybody who tries to predict who is going to do what really ought to take a
Their
number
tea leaves.
for after the election, because I think all bets are off.
I will say that I consider us as a movement partly responsible for the loss of Roe. And that's because we allowed the right wing to continue to stigmatize abortion all 50 years that it was legal, to the point where women didn't talk about their abortions. Now they are. They didn't talk about the miscarriages where, they couldn't get treatment in places where abortion wasn't legal, or D&Cs were questionable, all of which is happening now, which is the new, push by the right. And now women are, and now you don't feel ashamed. Whereas we used to still feel ashamed, which was our fault. We should have said, this is healthcare. Now they're saying, this is healthcare.
It was culture's fault.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, we didn't talk enough.
Yeah. But I don't think that we were responsible for that. I think that we didn't organize enough.
Exactly. We didn't organize it.
So, and I think the same thing happened with the ERA.
Yeah.
Because we were so optimistic. We had an article on the Equal Rights Amendment in our first issue, and we predicted that it was going to be part of the U.S. Constitution within 6 months, because there was this race of states to ratify it. But clearly, we were a little bit naive.
I think also we don't realize how effective and visual the anti-abortion groups were, with the bottles with fetuses in formaldehyde and all sorts of terrible images. When I did a series of articles at the Post in 1973, which led to the Ms. Magazine article on abortion, it was really in response to what was out there about abortion from the other side. And they never stopped. They never stopped. And I think Letty is right. We took it for granted, and I remember saying to myself after the January 73 issue, and I told my kids this story. I used to have different issues that I cared about and wrote about, and after the abortion thing, I said, well, that takes care of that issue, and went on to the next. And that was a mistake.
Is the fact that you can now read about sexual harassment in the New York Times or other publications, does that cut into Mrs. function in the world?
No, I think Ms. is the forerunner. I mean, Ms. made it enough of an issue that it can be on the front page of the New York Times. And you can assign your top journalists, to cover a story like Harvey Weinstein, instead of thinking, when we were in this world at first, there was a women's page. Every newspaper had a women's page, which was, a way of saying the rest of the newspaper is men's, right? And what was on the women's page, what most of us couldn't care less about. What wedding cake, what bustle they wore, how high what was the headpiece. We didn't care about that. And I love when the Times started saying what the women did. They didn't used to do that, what the mothers of the bride did, or what the women themselves did. Instead of them just being the children of, the daughters of.
There were also a lot of women on the women's page who got their jobs because that's where they could get jobs, and they really wanted to do something else, and they wanted to cover other things, and they got experience, and many of them went on to cover other things.
Oh, yeah.
Letty, Joanne, if you were back now in your roles as founders and editors of this magazine, what would be the cover of the next, or let's say the year-end edition of Ms.? What story would be on the cover?
the picture that illustrated the abortion article of the woman dead on a motel room floor
On a
from
ratty,
a botched abortion
ratty carpet.
should go back on a cover today.
That's a great idea.
That's an image that
It's a great idea.
nobody who's ever seen that image will ever forget it. And I recalled when we ran it again, when there was a big backlash, my memory of the first time we ran it was that it was a full page. It wasn't. It was very short. It was like this big. But it was so big in my mind because of what it was.
It was also interesting to me. I don't remember what year we were all marching in Washington, like 2015 or something.
Yeah.
And I had my husband and my oldest daughter, and suddenly I saw placards with that image. And I said, Laura, look, do you realize that's the image that was in my article? She said, Ma, that picture's all over the place.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that. It's become iconic, and it should be, and I didn't even pick it. It was selected by someone on staff
In our art
who
department.
called the Connecticut Department of Health. And what was interesting is it just came to us, it absolutely represented all women. We didn't even know who she was. Years later, a friend of one of the daughters of that woman came to me and said, "Did you know who she was?" I was embarrassed. I did not know. And it led to a TV program. My mother's, my sister Gary, I can't remember, and it became the story of the woman who was dead. And I participated happily because I felt terrible. At the time, we felt she just represented anyone and didn't focus on who she was. And eventually we did. But that image is still iconic.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. I never heard that. I always wondered. It was a police file photo, and we had no idea who she was. But the fact that you found out and that it got some publicity is amazing.
Well, it didn't occur to us to ask, and I was embarrassed that I didn't know. But this woman came forward, and I was delighted then to,
Acknowledge.
One final question from our president, Joe Berger.
I just want to thank the three of you. This has been one of the most interesting programs and riveting programs that we've had. And I just want to thank the three of you for being here and giving us all your insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks for asking us. Thank you.
And I hope you'll join the Silurians and you can come to some other interesting programs. So thanks again.